Hello and welcome to the Mobalytics patch 11.12 tier list. Once again, I'm Danox Harrison. There has been some big changes to our tier list. We've added an extra tier to better spread out the champions in our list, and we've updated the tier list page on our site. The tier list videos won't change too much as we'll still only focus on champs from S, A and B, but you can head on over to mobalytics.gg to see the full list including C and D tiers. They're featured in a table at the bottom of the page. Because of this addition, there's been a lot of movement to spread champions into the new tier, despite their individual strength not necessarily changing. Now let's jump straight in. First up, top lane. In the God tier we have Garen, Nasus and Ornn, and in the S tier we have Camille, Fiora, Kled, Mordekaiser, Riven, Set, Shen, Urgot and Wukong. In the top lane we had this Divine Sundra buff being the most significant thing. Champions who utilize this effectively have looked far better, the damage increase is solid, and because it's max health it functions against any target, but the heal increase is pretty significant and makes it a powerful one item spike. We did see some champion nerfs come through. Gnar lost 2 base AD, which is the latest in a series of nerfs which have had him struggling to retain relevance. Wukong got his AD per level and QAD ratio toned down, which has pushed him from God tier into S. And we also saw Nasus lose 2% passive lifesteal. With how well he's been performing and how good Sundra is, this isn't going to do too much to slow him down. Malphite also got a buff to the damage in his W. It definitely helps, but it's not a significant amount, and the problem is currently there are so many champions who just shred him even with the tank item buffs. Renekton also got a nerf to his sustain against minions from his Q. He's another champ who's been hit with multiple nerfs, and at this point he's just not performing too well in solo queue, and this is very much a nerf aimed at his presence in competitive. Now onto our highlight champs. First up is Camille. And Camille has consistently been a strong High-ELO pick, but she's recently started to shine at lower ranks. A big factor is the recent buff to Divine Sundra. Camille syncs incredibly well with Sheen items as a Q allows her to convert that damage to true damage to chunk any target. Divine Sundra also functions as a really strong one item spike as it gives you a bunch of HP, strong sustain and a good amount of damage. Camille scales really well into the late game, but even in the earlier stages you can hold her own, and a common strategy is to run Ignite instead of Flash. The hookshot you're still capable of getting out of sticky situations, and the extra combat summoner makes trading with you a lot more risky for your lane opponent. Onto Fiora, and she's been rising in popularity, and with Camille looking better she's a great counter in the top lane. Able to block a hookshot with a parry and out trade her as she scales. Fiora is a great split pusher and can look to tower dive opponents and take structures. With Gore Drinker giving her extra survivability, she's capable of team fighting effectively if she can get backline access. Damage is really threatening, and with a passive she can shred any target. And proccing her ult also grants a lot of value to her allies as well. With Camille's and Fiora's running around, Garen is the solid go-to answer to crush them in the early game. With powerful trading patterns between his silence and spinning, he's able to bully most opponents out and find momentum. In the mid game, Garen is bulky and hard to take down, but still dishing out enough damage to shred through squishy targets. Strikebreaker really helps you get on top of critical opponents, and shutting down 80 carries is really easy. Garen does struggle a bit more in the later stages, but he can soak a ton of damage and is still able to 100-0 a squishy target who he can connect onto. Next, we're moving on to the jungle. In the God tier we have Xin Zhao, Shaco and Warwick, and in the S tier we have Amumu, Diana, Fiddlesticks, Master Yi, Nocturne, Volibear and Zac. Jungle saw a big nerf to Udyr with his R damage being toned down a fair bit. This is on top of some previous nerfs that have pushed him down pretty significantly. He's still likely to be a popular pick at higher ranks, but the payoff just isn't as worth it in lower elos. We saw Rammus got a solid buff. He's been struggling since his ultimate rework as they gave him a range of compensation nerfs which were overkill, and as a result this is the first step in toning those back. Hecarim got a buff to his base armor and his Q bonus AD ratio. This is really going in the direction of bringing him into the meta. I could definitely see a Divine Sundra build working really well for him as he'll have a great mix of bulkiness and damage output. Finally, we saw Jarvan have a massive reduction on his W cooldown. It's a great change for him, but realistically it's not enough to allow him to hold his own against some of the stronger meta junglers, but he'll definitely appreciate it when skirmishing or looking to take duels. First up is Master Yi. He had his lethality build toned down last patch, but in return got a buff to his on-hit damage and is looking very powerful when utilizing a build focused on that. He's still potentially vulnerable in those early stages, but if he can navigate it then he could really start to find momentum. Ideally you want to be joining fights and skirmishes a bit later, allowing you to quickly clean up fights and get resets on your Q and extend your ult duration. Once you get some items under your belt, Yi will shred any target, and the only real concern is being focused down yourself, so be sure to pick up some defensive options if you feel it's necessary. Everyone has seen enough Master Yi to know how powerful his 1v9 potential is, and now is a great time to give him a go. Xin Zhao is the premier early skirmisher. His long range engage combined with his sustained damage allows him to get on top of his target and win most 1v1s. Look to use the pressure to find ganks, invade the enemy jungle, and control the map. Typically a lot of early pressure junglers can start to fall off, but Xin Zhao's ult offers so much survivability and zone control that he's still very relevant later on. In fact, because his engage rate is so high and he has so much defensive power from his ult, he's able to go for a very high damage build and look to decimate. Zac has been popping off. Buff to tank items combined with an increase to his clear speed he got a couple of patches ago, and the jungle now being more friendly towards ganking junglers has put him in a great spot. His early clear is fine, but you are potentially vulnerable Or if you can get to level 5, you're in a great position to look for long range ganks that are particularly effective against mobile champions. As the game goes on, you become super bulky and hard to kill, and your damage output is still more than enough to kill squish your targets you catch in your combo. Zac is a teamfight monster, and having such a reliable source of engage is always great. Just watch out for Janna tornadoes blocking your path. Moving on to the mid lane, in the God tier we have Lux, Annie and Malzahar, and in the S tier we have Ahri, Diana, Katarina, Rumble, Sett, Xerath, Yasuo and Yone. It saw pretty minimal changes. Ziggs got a solid buff, but in honesty he's performing better in the bot lane compared to mid most recently. We also saw a solid nerf to Talon. Overall his W actually has roughly the same damage, but it's now even more heavily weighted onto the return, which makes it a lot more reliant on connecting both instances of the damage. Rumble has been making waves in competitive playing in the jungle, but a lower ranks mid lane has been far more successful for him. Lack of mana, strong wave priority and skirmishing power means you can easily look to push your opponents in and rotate to help with fights when combating the enemy jungler. When it comes to teamfights, Rumble is on fire. Well, honestly, usually his opponents are. The Equalizer is such a powerful tool when placed correctly, and it makes it very difficult for the enemy team to look to contest dragons, barons, or fight anywhere near a choke point. It is a bit tricky to land Rumble reliably, so be sure to spam it in the practice tool until you're used to it. Xerath is looking really solid in the mid lane. He's definitely a champion who can be a bit trickier to play, but despite that he's been having a ton of success at lower ranks. His long range poke forces the enemy team to engage onto you or suffer heavily, and if you're able to consistently land skill shots then you can decimate the enemy team. Early laner phase can be tricky into more aggressive matchups, but as long as you maintain distance you should be able to clear effectively. Be cautious about stepping too far, and also when moving from mid, as there's often an opportunity for a jungler to get the jump on you. Yone is performing about as well as his brother on the recent patch. His laning phase starts a really common line at level 3, and he can apply a ton of pressure with heavy committal trades where he can just dart back to his starting position. A lot of mages struggle to deal with this harass, and often if they try and fire back, he can reactivate to dodge away from damage and CC. It goes without saying that Yone gets really powerful later in the game, and his 2-item spike is massive. In teamfights, if you're able to connect with your ultimate, you can explode squishy targets and easily dictate the outcome of a fight. On daily carries, in the God tier we have Sivir, Jhin and Misfortune. In the S tier we have Ashe, Kog'Maw, Swain, Vayne and Ziggs. In the AD carry role we saw a nerf to Kai'Sa's Q cooldown. This follows up onto the Halo Blades nerf, which resulted in a hit to her win rate. Overall she's struggling more and more in solo queue, and this was very much a nerf directed at how prevalent she is in competitive play. We also saw a similar instance with Varus, his empowered W being toned down. It's not as much of a significant nerf, but Varus already had a pretty rough solo queue win rate at lower ranks. Draven got a pretty big buff in terms of his Q damage. The overall numbers aren't insane, but considering how frequently he utilizes his axes, it really adds up. Finally, we saw Aphelios with a range of buffs across the board, and now this champion consistently struggles in solo queue however, especially at lower ranks, and it was a mix of buffs with compensation nerfs, so it's unlikely he'll become a meta-defining pick. On to highlight champs, first up is Ziggs, and he got some massive buffs on this patch. His ult has a higher missile speed at mid and long range, which means you'll be able to connect more easily with longer range targets, including following up on your allied CC. On top of that, he's getting an extra 20 damage on his Q at max rank, and considering how frequently we see Ziggs spam his bouncing bomb, this is a massive boost in power. In the bot lane, his ability to shove waves and take towers make him a very relevant threat. Typically early levels your QCD is a bit long and you're gated by your mana pool. When you pick up a Lost Chapter, you start to be able to decimate waves with little recourse. Keep your opponents trapped in a tower, chip it away, and then you can look to demolish structures in the early mid game. Rotating his Ziggs is a great strategy with how quickly he's able to annihilate structures, and the execute potential from his satchel is essentially as powerful as a Herald. Ezreal has been rising drastically in priority with the Divine Sunderer changes. Proc is allowing him to do more damage, but the significant healing increase makes him a very difficult target to punish. The build shown is a really solid one. Frozen Heart is a great defensive option with ability haste and mana, which sync well with Ezreal. As always, Ezreal's laning phase can be trickier, just as you're very reliant on landing mystic shots to trade, and the wave can deny that, coupled with lacking priority compared to other AD carries. If you can get him out of the laning phase and farm up to his 2-item spike, he's capable of taking over games. He's shredding completely, and despite the fact he's a mechanically difficult champion, he's been holding a good win rate at lower ranks. Misfortune is still a great go-to when you're looking to establish dominance in lane. She can apply huge amounts of pressure and can often look for kills or plates. Recently people have been leaning into Kraken Slayer a fair bit, although there's definitely a mix of people buying lethality. Ultimately both are viable, and it depends whether you want more sustained damage or burst. Their ult is monstrous in teamfights, and a well placed one in combination with CC is an easy way to rack up a teamfight win. On to the supports. In the God tier we have Zyra, Zillion and Leona, and in the S tier we have Bran, Janna, Lulu, Nami, Sona, Soraka and Xerath. For support we saw almost nothing change. There were no buffs or nerfs to this patch, and mostly the changes that came through were simply shifts in priority. With a lot of the dominant engaged champs like Leona, Thresh, Alistar and Rell nerfed, and with Shirelli has been so powerful we've seen a huge rise in their success. We'll see from S tier there's a bunch of these picks like Janna, Lulu, Nami, Sona and Soraka, and as a result there's also been a rise in the prevalence of mages who can look to abuse these champions and outtrade them in the laning phase. First up is Zyra, and her buffs have actually made a pretty significant difference. She's winning really frequently and doing well into the range of enchanters who are popular right now. Even into more aggressive picks, as long as you can mitigate pressure off and engage, then you can harass down and chunk out your opponents. Critically with Zyra, it's not even a massive concern if you end up dying in team fights. As long as the opposing team commits to you and you get your ult off, then you're able to set your team up for victory even after your death. Zyra's damage output is insane and often works really well as a pick if your team is lacking AP, as it forces the opposing team to buy MR or you will decimate. Similar to Zyra, Brown's been performing really well, but not on the back of buffs. He's simply just been doing well into the enchanters utilizing Shurelya's that have been finding success. He's able to trade with them at a distance, but critically if you land a stun you have a lot of kill pressure as you're able to proc your passive. When it comes to team fights, your ultimate can shred through teams, and often it's enough to just throw your ult into the enemy team to turn fights heavily in your favor. You can be a vulnerable target however, and the fact that you have to land 2 abilities to stun an opponent means you can struggle against dive or high mobility champions. Blitzcrank is a great option to carry a game. Be cautious that with the rise in popularity of Ezreal, it's not a matchup you want to be caught in due to the fact that he can buffer his E with your grab. That being said, you're more than justified to ban Ezreal right now, and with any other champion your grab is basically going to secure a kill. Roaming is very effective and you can easily set up plays in the mid lane, and although Blitz does fall off as the game goes on, a god grab can always dictate a game. In the bot lane, it's ideal to be paired up with an AD carry who can take out the target you grab and also connect him with the right target. It's not ideal if you pull in the enemy Leona only for them to dive onto your AD carry. Typically Blitz does well into things like Janna, Lulu and Nami, who will suffer heavily if you connect. And that's it for this patch. Hopefully this has been helpful in getting you up to speed on the meta. It was a bit of a big video with a shift up to our format, and if you're interested in seeing the full low elo and high elo lists in one place, including C and D tiers, then head on over to mobalytics.gg where you can get even more info including counters, builds, tips, combos and more. Everything has just been revamped, so be sure to check it out. See you next time and thanks for watching.